All right, hey, I'm Brandon from Hoyack, and today I'm going to talk about a subject that's kind of new. It recently came up, and I think that it's worth kind of mentioning just because it's one of those new buzzwords. A lot of people haven't heard this buzzword yet, and it's a buzzword that's made up of a couple other buzzwords, okay? So this is called slop squatting, all right? So slop squatting, okay? This is essentially, there's two parts to this, all right? There's the slop part and there's the squatting part, all right? And these two parts kind of indicate what's going on here if you're familiar with how these buzzwords are being used or have been used in various circles. So whenever we refer to something as slop, a lot of times it's kind of I would call it a term we're referring to many times to AI. All right, it's kind of a I don't know, a word we occasionally might use for certain AI generated content. Okay, and so this AI generates a lot of sort of sloppy stuff, or it just generates, a lot of stuff. And so we have this buzzword. Now, in addition to that, the squatting part, okay? So squatting is going to be where somebody, in cybersecurity at least, you're going to have somebody that's placed something somewhere, okay? And they're sitting on something that somebody else would otherwise have been normally using, and maybe they stopped using it, okay? So let's say that somebody has something on the internet. Let's call this a property, an internet property, okay? It could be like a GitHub repo or a website or a blog or any number of things, a lot of things, okay? And especially when these properties are part of like bigger communities, okay, that have a lot of these properties, and they're kind of all bundled behind like a certain domain name. Let's just say like GitHub, okay? So let's say that all these there's all these different like GitHub repos out there and things like that, and somebody has, their repo and people are using it, all right? Now, so one of the things that's happened before, and especially just in the realm of like traditional squatting, is that maybe somebody along the way, they kind of like, this thing here, it gets deleted, all right? Doesn't exist anymore. But the reference to it, okay, it doesn't exist anymore either. But that doesn't stop somebody else from just standing up something and then using the same reference as their own. So all of the people who are looking at that reference, they're using, the search engine, and they're seeing this reference, but then when that reference gets changed to, when it gets deleted now, and then somebody else uses the same reference, now they're going to go and they're going to look at that reference instead. And they don't know that that reference isn't what it used to be. Okay, so this is like the idea of squatting. Okay, so you can imagine like maybe you have an internet domain name, and it's like a big time internet domain name, and somebody, like that domain name expires. Okay, somebody else registers it and stands something up on it, and all this traffic is going to that thing because it expired, it wasn't supposed to be there anymore. Somebody said, there's a lot of traffic that's looking for that. I want to capture that traffic. I want to capture these eyes or do something. I want to, in the case of this like GitHub example, I want to inject stuff back to this person, and it's going to be evil stuff, probably, okay, writing along that injection, all right? And it may even contain like the original stuff that was at that other reference, but now there may be something else writing along that's not supposed to be there. So that's kind of the risk of what's going on. Now, when we take that's just all normal internet type squatting stuff, nothing new, nothing special. Very, very typical, especially in the realm of cybersecurity, where these kinds of things happen all the time, and there's hackers that are scanning for this kind of opportunity, and there's even like bug bounties where, a big company will be like, oh, hey, yeah, can you find a bug and we'll pay you if you do. And there's people that are looking for like big companies that had some of these kinds of repos or something, or different domain names and references that existed that no longer exist, that then somebody could just register or use the same reference and then become what would essentially be, in this case, a supply chain attack, okay? Because this property is providing something supplying something to the person who's looking for it, and what they're supplying tends to have some kind of parasitic load behind it, or something, and you don't know what it is. It could be any number of things, but the point is that it got to you, and it shouldn't have. All right. So now enter slop. Okay, slop squatting. This is where things get kind of interesting, because you see, in the world of AI, all right, when you ask AI, hey, generate an app, and if you ask like a vibe coding platform or something like that, make an app, okay? And just as for example, I want you to make I want you to use a common weather API or something like that, like some kind of API that you need to import into the project that's going to provide some kind of functionality. Because whenever we build apps, a lot of times we don't build every single thing by hand. There's very common structures, repetitive stuff, encryption systems, and SDKs for other APIs, or all kinds of different little things that we might just pull in that are very, very well-known common libraries, okay? And so there's big communities around some of these, and they're very, very, very well-known, and everybody's using them, and so you have, you kind of spec them into your plans, okay? Like, oh, I'm gonna pull in this, this thing to manage different numbers called NumPy or pandas, or all kinds of different things, okay? So you don't, but now in very large organizations though, and in certain organizations that have a extremely high, security disposition, they're going to, limit the amount of those that you can pull in. They really don't want anybody and everybody just bringing stuff in and grabbing it from these common internet kind of properties. What they want is they say, well, you need to build all the functionality, by hand. And so that's a bit of a challenge, and so that creates a much heavier lift when it comes to writing an app. So we want to bring some of this stuff in to do rapid application development, rapid prototyping, building MVPs and stuff like that. It's very common that we're going to do some of those things. Now, today, the AI-generated code many people are leveraging, it's bringing in common libraries, very well-known libraries. Just adds them, brings them in. However, what will happen is the AI sometimes will hallucinate a library, and it'll come up with something that doesn't exist. Instead of this common weather library, or instead of this, library, instead of something to manage this manipulating numbers a certain way or something like that, the AI will come up with a library, a property that literally doesn't exist. It never has existed. It just hallucinates this idea, okay? And then on top of that, what's even worse is it doesn't do it just once. It actually does it very frequently. So if it thinks it knows of something that doesn't exist, and it hasn't been retrained, then it's going to just think that thing exists, and it's just going to present it to everybody as the solution. So what happens here is that, essentially it's looking for a property that never existed, and so the squatters will squat a property on top of the location that the AI is pointing the app at. So now you're looking at something that literally has never existed before. An attacker stood it up as if it was legitimate, and they now are going to take your traffic. They're going to embed in your app whatever it is that they want. It's the same thing that would be going on here. It's just that in this case, the property did exist at some point, and they now are getting rid of it disappeared or got deprecated. Somebody else then squats on what did exist. In this case, it never existed, didn't exist. But AI thinks it exists. So boom, you just build something on top of what AI thinks it exists. Now, how do the attackers figure this out? Well, what they do is they basically make a bunch of different, they essentially kind of brute force these things. They make a bunch of different queries, and occasionally they'll figure out that, hey, this query is good because what I'm going to do here is I'm seeing that there's a common name that's being presented that doesn't exist. So they can scan for this, and they can find like these empty lots that AI is pointing at and saying, hey, there's a weather API import on that lot. But there never was until now. Suddenly, boom. So we bring these things in, and now it's a supply chain attack that affects you. So essentially what is happening here is AI is hallucinating a parasitic load for your app and injecting it into your code. Now, when you're using like vibe coding platforms and AI generated code, especially when you're like a solo dev, or maybe even on a small, tiny little dev team with no real standards or processes, you're going to end up like prompting the AI and saying, build this thing for me. It builds it. You test it. It works. You're happy. You deploy it. You move on. You don't ever realize this parasite got brought in because you never really read the code. You wouldn't know how. You just know that the AI can just generate what you want. And it did it. And you begged it and begged it and begged it and prompted it for a while and got it to do what you wanted to do. But you have no idea what is going on under the hood. Okay? And even if you look at what's going on under the hood, you're like, this all looks good. But what's not good is that import that you didn't research, because there's all these imports. There's tons of imports, and they're all over in all these different files. They're coming in from all these different places, and in imports of imports, and stuff that's importing stuff and things. So it's like this import chain. This chain that you've got to follow. You don't go and look at it. So if you're not paying super close attention to what the actual code that's coming out of your app is doing, then you're going to end up in a position where you might be exposed or expose a customer base or something like that, this type of slop squatting attack. What to do to avoid this? Obviously, code review, professional code review. If you generate an app, and you're going to use it in terms of actual production, and like you either have to make sure that you look at this and examine it, determine like if there's actual vulnerabilities there by doing the work yourself, or you have to leverage like a professional team, professional dev house or something like that to just do your code reviews. That may be like a smaller lift, than before. It's kind of like a law firm. If you go to a law firm and you say, hey, write me a contract with all this different stuff in it. The law firm goes back, writes it all up, comes back after a while. Here it is. Here's your bill. Did it all. I wrote it all. I hand wrote everything. Your bill's pretty big. Alternatively, if you bring in a boilerplate doc and you edit it yourself, you give it to the lawyer. Oftentimes the lawyer just makes a couple tweaks to it, sends it back, bill's a lot lower. That's what can happen in a situation like, a vibe-coded app or something like that, where you generated an app, it's like functionally working, it's doing what you want it to do. You just need to make sure that it doesn't have any security vectors, vulnerabilities, stuff like that. So you have to give it to a company that knows what they're doing and can review that. Do the code review, look for any kind of vectors, make sure that, no slop squatting is going on, little things like that. And as long as you kind of follow that kind of process, then you are going to be better off. But if you're building out and you're just hiring devs and they're just building apps and you're focused on, does it work? Do the inputs that I'm giving it get the outputs I'm expecting? Whatever else is going on in between that doesn't matter. That's where you get into trouble. And that's what you want to avoid doing, that's going to get you potentially hit with some of these different kinds of vectors. So, I hope that kind of breaks down the concern and explains and this isn't new to devs. Devs have always had to check their libraries. It's a very common thing, some people would say, oh man, AI generates better code than the devs anyway. So why is it called slop? It's beautiful code. It's written excellently. It does its job and it's instantly generated. Devs can't do that. It's always better to use AI than handcrafted code. Okay, yeah. As long as you can read it and understand and follow what it's doing, it can be in many cases. But you still have to be able to follow the traditional kind of software development routine kind of health stuff that you would always have had to follow. And when AI is making commits to your repo for you that you're reviewing based on functional stuff, the inputs produce the expected outputs, you expose yourself to this whole thing where you don't know what's happening in the middle of the code, and that's where you need the analysis. So always engage with professional dev teams, even if you're doing things like vibe coding, even if you're doing, trying to do it yourself. Be aware of this stuff, learn how to track it down and find it, learn how to do your own troubleshooting. I think that's one of the areas where a lot of these apps, these AI-generated apps are running into a lot of problems. People don't know how to troubleshoot them. People don't know how to build systems in the app so they can troubleshoot them. And they definitely don't oftentimes know how to build stuff to track if there's any parasitic loads that are attached to the things that are embedded in that app. So keep those things in mind, and hopefully you're never affected by any of this, but definitely look for your dev resources. Make sure you've got alignment with the resources, because it might be a lot less expensive to have some help with DevOps and code review and stuff like that, instead of doing the full build on the app and just having a professional dev house doing that type of mitigation. So I'm Brandon from Hoyack, and this has been Whiteboard Wednesday.